Hey y'all, Lily here with Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show y'all how I made this geode tumbler. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And don't forget, you can follow me on all of my socials, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. I'm starting with a 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler, and I am first sanding my tumbler down with a 100 grit sanding block, and then I'm wiping my tumbler down with 91% alcohol to remove any of that excess oil or dust that may have been placed on my tumbler. And then let your tumbler dry before you move on with the next step. I'm going to paint my tumbler with my Pop of Color Cool White, and I'm using my Wet n Wild makeup brush to apply my paint to my tumbler. I'm going to add some glitter to my tumbler, and it's going to be from Glitter Heart Co, Hello Gorgeous, and Diamonds. I do have a 10% off code, Miss Kiss, that will also be in my description below. I'm using my Pop of Color paint for my adhesive, so this paint works very well for my glitter adhesive. So what I'm doing first is I'm applying this paint all around my tumbler, and I'm going to apply my glitters while my paint is still wet. If you want, you can always use the Mod Podge and acrylic paint method, or the spray adhesive method, or even the epoxy method. I'm going to take my Hello Gorgeous, which is the more chunky glitter, and just add spots around the tumbler. This is where those geodes are going to start. So you'll have your chunky little spots, and then I'm taking that fine glitter and I'm just placing that all around the tumbler, not thinking if that goes over those big spots or anything. I'm just filling in all of that blank white spaces. And you'll see at the bottom I kind of missed a spot, so I go back in with some Pop of Color paint, and then I just dab some on there very lightly, and I add some more glitter. I'm going to let this dry for about 15 to 20 minutes before moving on to my next step. Once that paint's dried after about 15-20 minutes, I'm going to spray my tumbler with my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating about 2 times, and then let that dry for another 15 to 20 minutes before adding my alcohol inks to my tumbler. All of my inks that I'll be using will be posted in my description below, but here's a list of the paints or inks that I will be using. I'm using TRex brand, and then I'm using one Tim Holtz brand. All I did was just look in my acrylic ink box, and I just grabbed the blues that I thought would go together. So if you have a different shade, just be creative, and I'm sure you're gonna make something beautiful. I started with the darkest color, which was that indigo, and I added that to that Hello Gorgeous, or the chunky glitter part, and all I did was just add the ink around it. It's simple as that. The fact that I sealed this tumbler with that acrylic coating allows that ink to stay in place, in my opinion, so it doesn't really run as much. I try to use like an alcohol ink like blower to dry the inks a little quicker, and I really didn't get anywhere with that. But after this video, I thought maybe would be a good idea is if I bought like a makeup fan, or even one of the fans that people use whenever they're hot, like the portable ones. So that might be a good idea to purchase. I'll link one of those in my description below for y'all. It's like $5 to $12 or something. I purchased it after. But after you apply your inks, you would just fan over the inks just to make sure that they were completely dry, so you don't have to worry about any drips. But like I said, all I did was start with my darkest color where that chunky glitter was placed on my tumbler, and then I added colors around it. It didn't matter which color I added next. I just wanted that darker color to be added first, because with a lot of geodes, the darker colors in the middle, and then it fans out to random colors. So you'll see I have my little blower tool. Really didn't do much of a difference, but that's okay. It's really easy as that. It's not that difficult. So I love these tumblers because they come out super gorgeous, and they're really for beginners. And as long as you're starting in the center with the chunky glitter, it adds that like depth and dimension, in my opinion. So it's easier to, or it looks nicer in my opinion, to start where the chunky glitters are than not. And that way with the chunky glitters, you have kind of a template, so you're not just adding those inks in like random spots, if that makes sense. And on another note, if you don't have chunky glitter on hand, you don't have to go out and buy some. You can always just add this design on some fine glitter and call it a day. Or if you want, you can glitter your tumbler with all chunky glitter and add this to chunky glitter. I just like adding the chunky glitters in spots to add some depth, and it also gives me a nice template. Do whichever way you feel comfortable and whatever materials you have on hand, and use whichever colors you like. I added a decal to this tumbler, so keep that in mind. I tried to leave a white or blank space to add that decal kind of diagonal on the tumbler. So if you are planning on adding that decal in your blank space, just keep that in mind whenever you do your design. If not, just fill in those blank spaces as much as you like or as little as you like. Once I was finished with this, those inks dry like instantly within like a minute, so you don't have to worry about it going on the turner or anything. I go right in with my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating another time. So again, I spray 2 generous coats of that acrylic coating around this tumbler, and then I let that dry for about another 15-20 minutes before moving on to the next step. And I'll have that Krylon acrylic crystal coating linked in my description below for y'all, so you guys can access it very easily. And for the next step, I'm going to add my epoxy. I used a total of 40 mLs of epoxy. That's 20 mLs part A and 20 mLs part B, totaling 40 mLs of epoxy. All I did was I take my 20-ounce tumbler and then I times that by 2, so I'm using 40 mLs of epoxy. If I was using a 30-ounce tumbler, I would times that by 2, so I would use 60 mLs of epoxy. I let that cure on my tumbler. Whenever you're done with the curing process, whenever it's done spinning, if you have some bumps, don't sand it. You don't want to sand anything away. We're going to leave it bumpy. If there's little like glitter pieces sticking up, don't worry about that. I don't want you sanding away or adding any craters around your tumbler. Every time after I epoxy, I go right in with my X-Acto knife and I clean up my rim. I do this every time. I find this a lot easier than waiting till the last step. And then I take a sanding block and then I sand around the tumbler just to create the smallest little stainless steel piece to create that seal once we go in epoxy for the final time. And then I use my 91% alcohol again and I wipe down my tumbler just to give it a nice clean cleaning. So now we're going to add those like geode lines, and I had Sharpies on hand. I just again found my blue Sharpies in gold, and then all I'm doing is I'm making squiggly lines where those colors meet, and I'm not lining it up perfectly. So I'm not trying to get like that perfect geode shape. If it's not like in that color, then that's okay. All I'm doing is drawing around it with like squiggliness, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to keep it kind of the same shape, but not kind of the same shape, if that makes sense. What I'm trying to say is don't overanalyze this. Don't overthink this process. These tumblers are for beginners, so really just, you can even use, if you think you're making such a straight line, whenever I started doing this, I used my non-dominant hand, so my left hand, and then that's how I made my line to make it more squiggly. In my opinion, I like to have like squiggly lines than like straight lines because it looks more natural. Just try to follow that colors as best as you can, but don't sit there and trace and make it so perfect. Like I said, these are geodes, so they're not perfect. That's what's beautiful about them. So just do your thing. I know that there are acrylic paint markers, and if you have other markers on hand, use those. Not acrylic paint, there's something else, but there's plenty of art markers out there, but I just thought that a lot of people had Sharpies on hand and I had them on hand. So I wanted to see if they worked, and they worked really well. And if I wanted them to be thicker, I would just go over the line a couple times and they would be just a little thicker. So especially these metallic ones, they popped on this tumbler just beautifully, and I really like how it turned out. The great thing about using these Sharpies is you didn't have to seal the tumbler after using them, so I went right into applying my epoxy right over these Sharpies. I'm using a thinner coat of epoxy, total of 12 mLs of epoxy over this tumbler. The reason why that I am using epoxy before adding my decal is because my tumbler was still a little bumpy, so again, I didn't sand my tumbler at all. I went right in with those pins, and then I epoxied over, so I had a nice smooth tumbler. I wanted a nice smooth surface before adding my decal, and that's what this gave me. So just that small coat of epoxy, it locked in those inks, and I had a nice smooth tumbler before adding my gold gorgeous decal to this tumbler. And again, since I epoxied my tumbler, I took my X-Acto knife just to clean up the rim. I do apologize for my camera angle. This camera was changed while I was recording, so my camera is very zoomed in, but you'll see most of it, and then at the end you'll see the overall tumbler. Well, I did the same thing. All I did was I sanded my tumbler down with a 220 grit sanding block. I didn't have to worry about sanding away any of the glitter because I had that extra coat of epoxy on that tumbler. So I just had a nice clean surface. And then for the rougher areas, I felt comfortable enough to sand with a 180 grit sanding block since I did have that extra coat of epoxy over my tumbler. And then I wiped my tumbler down with that 91% alcohol, and look at that shine, it's gorgeous. I'm adding like a gold or copper color decal to this tumbler, and the file that I'm using is Be Real Not Perfect, and this is available on my Etsy shop. The file is available on my Etsy shop, not the decal itself, and I believe it's like $1.99 or something, so it's super cheap. I try to keep them cheap for y'all because I know crafting is super expensive. But all I'm doing is I'm weeding my vinyl here, and then I'm going to add the transfer tape to apply my decal to the tumbler. Again, I left that blank space on my tumbler, so I just added that right to my blank space. I'm sorry that it's so zoomed in, but I guess you're getting a closer look of that gorgeous glitter. And I added the decal at a diagonal angle, and then I'm going to peel up that transfer tape. Once I peel up that transfer tape, I always go in with my CCDIY Quick Coat, which is a urethane sealer. This stuff is the best. If you have not purchased it, you have to spend the money on this. This allows that vinyl to stick to the tumbler, so you don't have to worry about that vinyl peeling up after you epoxy your tumbler. And once that quick coat was dry, I went in with 2 coats of epoxy. So I used a total of 12 mLs of epoxy for each coat. I did my first coat, I let that dry or cure, and then I did my second coat. I like to do 2 thinner coats because for me, it makes it less bulky, and it's easier for me to have a smooth tumbler than putting that nice thick coat at the end, because then you might have your tumbler be like bumpy or something. So for me, I think it just looks better, and it's easier to do those 2 coats than that 1 thick coat. Once I was finished with epoxying my tumbler, I went in with my X-Acto knife for the final time. Clean up the rim. You clean the inside with Dawn dish soap before selling or gifting your tumbler, and then your tumbler is ready to go. I absolutely loved creating this tumbler, and one of my favorite things about these tumblers are, 1, they're for beginners, so anybody can do them, and 2, they always come out so perfectly gorgeous, and they always come out different. So I will do this tumbler again next week, and I swear that this tumbler will be completely different. I just love the variety that you have with these, and the creativity that you can just let yourself flow with. It's great and just so peaceful. This tumbler will be available on my website middle of February or so, and then I will have more tumblers posted on my website for sale. I will list my website in my description below, and don't forget that you guys can find me on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for more of those fast tumbler tutorials if you guys are in a rush. And then I also started posting a lot of shorts for y'all. You guys can always reach out to me to any of my social media accounts if you guys have any of those tricky questions. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see y'all next time.